What's up, everyone, and welcome back to the Union Fitness Podcast. As always, I'm Jared,
I am the one and only Curtis Miller,
also known as King Kong.
besides my father, who is the original Curtis Miller, and every other Curtis Miller there is in the world. It's a very popular name, from what I understand.
But Miller's a pretty common name.
It is, yeah. Did you see you said something about King Kong. Did you see the new movie?
Yeah.
Was it good?
I mean, as Josh stated last
You
time.
tell us, King Kong. Was it any good?
Yeah, how do you feel afterwards?
How'd you feel about your 6 rounds with Godzilla?
It was a fight. It was a challenge, I blacked out. So I don't exactly remember what happened, but it's just like every other time I've had an encounter with people. So all the way back from, the original, what was it, 1945 was my first one. And those airplanes kind of got me a little bit.
I just assumed that was Curtis Miller Sr.
No, that was me.
That was you?
Me. Yeah.
Wow,
I'm
you're
that
old.
You
Ancient.
You age well.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
We should dive into that a little bit, like the secret to how you look so good at such a
I think the only thing I don't have going for me right now is my hairline. And this beautiful glow that I have in the corners, but you just gotta roll with it. You can't be perfect.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about today?
So well, I think we decided that we were going to talk a little bit about injury and lifting with and or through injury or not lifting.
Yeah, so this is something that is very important to understand. I mean, if you are going to participate in any serious physical activity, whether it's lifting, whether it's running, cycling, strongman, wrestling, like it doesn't really matter. There is always a risk of injury. Now, if you don't understand that going into it, that you might want to rethink that, because when it happens, you don't want to get to that point and you're like, oh my goodness, I don't know if this is for me, and if you figure that out along the way, that's okay. But what we're going to do is kind of talk about what injury means, the differences between injury, pain, and discomfort, how to, I don't want to say fight through it, but work with injury, work around injury, and some things that can help you along the way. So like, I think one thing that I want to do is talk about our experiences with it. All the way back from like as early as you can remember, not necessarily just lifting related, but like whatever, how we kind of work through it, and then, we'll roll with that.
All right. Well, I guess I'll start then.
Fire it up.
So I think, playing sports my whole life, get injured all the time, or, aches and pains and stuff. But the first like real like big injury that I like had that like really debilitated me, which I think I've talked about on here before, is I tore my left hamstring, one of my hamstring muscles, right? I had lifted that day, worked, and then went and played like flag football with my friends, and gets real competitive. I take off down the field and just felt like a gunshot in my leg.
Yeah, buddy.
Yeah, not good. I wasn't a physical therapist at the time, nor did I like care to see anybody, so I didn't do anything about it. And I couldn't like run or jump or like do anything that I was able to do for almost 2 years.
Do you think your career was over? Like that was it? You're not going to the league?
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah.
I could not make it to the league at that point. I could only jump off my right foot.
That's the only reason.
I couldn't plant on my left. It was a mess, you know. But I think one of the best things I did, like, I don't know if I completely tore it or partially. I have no idea.
Doesn't really matter.
So the body's an amazing thing. It hypercompensated for me. So now I have 2 really huge hamstring muscles on my left side, and you can feel like all 3 muscle bellies on my right, which is kind of interesting. But the rehab that I did was I started a landscaping job.
Oh,
and
nice.
At first, like I could barely like walk a wheelbarrow up the ramp because it like just hurt. It felt like it was gonna cramp and tear, but I had to work. So eventually, it just adapted, and now
we're talking
I'm pretty
like
good.
thousands of repetitions there.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like the little stuff that you don't really think about.
But yeah, so didn't really know anything at the time. That was like the first big debilitating injury. My body has hypercompensated like everywhere because of it. And so I still like with lifting deal with some of that stuff. More recently, let's see, what have I done? Well, I dealt with a chronic like hip tendonitis issue right on the like the lateral side of
Mhm.
my hip here, the outside portion of my hip. I wasn't able to low bar squat for 2 years about, so I had to train like a high bar or a front squat variation. My coach helped me through that. And that still like comes back here and there if I like
Mhm.
really overload it, and then I'm like really bad about sleep and stuff. So
Real quick, I know a guy who's going through that.
mhm.
And what is that caused from? And like, what did you do kind of with that?
So on the outside of your hip, like if you feel on the outside of your hip here, right, you have a bone that sticks out.
Yeah.
Right. So that's your greater trochanter. It's
Right.
on the outside of your femur. Your IT band runs over top of
Mhm.
it, and then you have some muscles of your hips that attach there to like help externally
Yeah.
rotate your hip. So sometimes if they get overloaded, you can get like a tendonitis there or a
Mhm.
bursitis. And it's not really too distinguishable unless you like really get an ultrasound or something.
Mhm.
But that like just because there's tendonitis at that point, anytime there's stress put on that muscle, you're gonna have pain.
Sure.
So like with a squat, running, jumping, anything like that.
Okay.
And then for even like older people going up and down stairs, getting in and out of a car.
Right.
Well, actually, not even older people. It hurt me getting in and out of
Yeah.
a car.
Younger people.
Yeah. So the things I did, like, I had to figure out like where my deficits were. Right. I actually did go to a PT for it because it was like really debilitating. And so had to do a lot of hip mobility drills. I had some limitations on my left compared to my right. A lot of hip strengthening through like external rotation and abduction, just because that was another deficit that we found. And then after I get all that squared away and it's a little more normal, I had to like start to relearn. I mean, I really had to like reteach myself how to squat. Like my coach and I had to work on my motor pattern for squatting because I was just way overloading my side. I was shifting. So we had to work a lot on that. So back down to different types of squats and like whatever was pain free and slowly work our way up.
Got it. Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. So was since then had anything really crazy going on?
No.
Just normal stuff.
Minor aches and pains,
Yeah,
strains
yeah,
here and
yeah.
there, you know.
Was there a time that you maybe like thought you were injured, but it was just like a pain and discomfort? Like,
Oh,
let's talk about kind of like the differences that, especially you being a PT, you probably have people a lot, even when you're working with them, when they're going through physical therapy and stuff, they tell you one thing. They say they might be feeling one thing, but they're really feeling something else. Like, let's talk about the differences between them.
Okay, so kind of a loaded question, I guess. So for people who come to the gym, I think they have a better awareness of their bodies to know the difference between a pain that's associated with lifting, you know, like a muscle burn, or like a stretch, like a hard stretch, something like that, compared to like an oh crap, this isn't good for me pain, right? For the general population, what I tend to ask people is when they're exercising and doing stuff and they go, oh, this like really hurts. I'm like, is it the same pain that you came in with? Or does it just feel like your muscle's burning? Or does it just feel like that area's, you know, stretching a lot or something like that? And if they can differentiate, that's how we can have that conversation. But if they're like, oh, no, this my low back, it hurts right there every time I do this thing, then it's reproducing their pain. Not a good pain to be in, right? Because I'm not a big fan of the no pain, no gain.
Right.
Right?
Yeah,
you don't want to keep like poking it.
Yeah.
If it's hurt.
Now, like a lot of times you get somebody who will be like doing a deadlift. Like I've had first timers come in class, and there's always certain progression that we go with in order to get them to do a deadlift. But I've had people do a deadlift and they stand up after a set or two, and they're like, I don't think that was good. I feel that in my back. And I'm like, okay, what did you feel and where'd you feel it? And 9 times out of 10, they go, I just felt it like in my muscles on each side of my spine. I'm like, yeah, dog.
Is it pumped?
Yeah. And most of the time they're like, yeah, that's what it feels like. I'm like, yeah, you're working those muscles. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of people. And I think I was telling you yesterday, there were 2 guys that I saw who were doing good mornings with the safety squat bar. And the one guy was like, hey, man, we're going to do these good mornings. The other guy responded and said, man, I heard those are bad for you. I don't want to do those. So like right there, that was his association with good mornings and probably deadlifts too.
Yeah.
And, you know, like, how do we get out of that? You know?
Yeah. I think a big part of it is there's such a stigma on spine flexion, for example, being like so bad for you. It is like spinal flexion is not bad for you. The body can naturally do it. You need spinal flexion, and I don't care how neutral of a spine anyone thinks they're going into, you have to have some degree of like lumbar flexion when you squat. It happens naturally on small levels at every segment, right? So you're not gonna fully prevent it. I don't care who you think you are. But I mean it comes with, people get injured when they go to do the deadlift and their back starts to round, and then they have an injury associated. So you can overload like a certain position, right, and push extra stress on tissues, and that's, I think, where that comes from. And in that case, that's where you have to learn like proper mechanics to lift safely and efficiently. But I think like we just take like somebody got hurt because they slightly rounded their back too much and had too much weight on the bar, did too many reps. They got hurt, because they had too much flexion. And then because of that, that gets carried on to the point where people are like, you can't, flex your spine at all. It's
Right.
like, never, ever, ever, ever. You can't do it.
Right.
And that's silly.
Well, I think if that were the case, like I'm one to preach a good neutral spine, right?
Yeah.
But understanding that it's going to move, it's going to flex, right? The goal is to put ourselves in that position to have a good, strong neutral spine. But yeah, there's always movement. If everybody got injured every time their back flexed, then everybody would have blown out back.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So I think understanding that, and I mean, you see people lifting all the time that have rounded backs, and yeah, there's different levels of it, right? Like we don't want a severe flexion in the lumbar region, but like you're going to see some of the best lifters, I think, have a little bit, and yeah, I don't. It's not a terrible thing.
Yeah. So I mean, also look at most of the best lifters. Their erectors are like
monster muscles,
giant.
everywhere.
I mean, they look like you. So and they've trained it to the point where like a tiny bit of spine flexion isn't going to hurt them, and they're still like efficient in the movement. Where it happens more, I would say, is somebody who, just goes into that position, never tries to fix it or get like a more optimal position, so their spine is a little more exposed to certain forces, and then when they eventually get to a certain weight or a certain rep range or whatever, something gives.
Yeah. So I think it comes with experience. I think it comes with the amount of time that you're actually conditioning and strengthening your body as well. So that's just a little bit of it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to touch on like some of my injuries.
Do it.
And we'll go into that. My first one was meniscus tear. Good old meniscus tear when I was 15, and that was certainly an injury. And I recovered from that. Still to this day, have a little bit of like right calf atrophy from it, which is pretty interesting. But if you were to ask me, if I had no idea that I had surgery on my right knee, I would not know it. And I think part of that was the strength training that I started doing after the fact. Because before that, we didn't really do any. I think I talked about how we didn't really do any strength training in high school. Once I started learning how to squat correctly, started getting stronger, building muscle around the knee, I have, I get the occasional click. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if I were to pull my foot up on my leg right now, I'd probably feel it just a little bit. But besides that, knock on wood, I never feel it when I lift.
Good.
So, that was the first one. And it's crazy because you hear a lot of people that have had something like that and they're like, oh man, that's why I don't squat. Or, I got bad knees. I had knee surgery. It's like, man, I wonder what my life would be like if I was the same way, if I had that knee surgery and if I never learned how to squat correctly, or if I never strengthened my muscles. Like it might be worse. Would you?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was probably one of my only injuries until a couple years ago. I tore my hamstring, and that was kind of like a lingering thing. And you actually helped me with that, because when I tore my hamstring, it kind of led to a lot of imbalances, to where I was having quad issues on both sides. And you kind of helped me with the importance of focusing on the areas that were weak, that were kind of causing those issues. And it hasn't lingered, But every once in a while when I'm warming up for deadlifting, if I don't really take my time getting a lot of blood flow in there, I can feel it.
Mm-hmm.
It just feels tight. And the first couple times in the back of your mind, you're like, oh man, it's going to let go again.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just keep working through it and you realize that it goes away. So that's a big difference between that discomfort and like an injury.
Mm-hmm.
That's not an injury right there.
Nope.
That's just discomfort. That's just the lingering effects of it. So that's kind of something to understand too. But during that time, I could have just kind of like shut myself down and been like, I don't want to do this right now. I don't want to do this anymore. But I think it was one of those things where I saw it as a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's like, all right, I came back from this when I was 15 in the middle of a baseball season. Our team, by the way, went and played in the state championship that year and I didn't get to play. So like that was motivation enough right there.
Yeah.
And so when this happened with my hamstring, I was like, dude, this sucks. This sucks. Because I was getting ready for a meet at the time. I was like 3 weeks out from a meet when I did it. And, you're devastated at first. But I think it all depends on your mindset going into it. And it's like, what are my goals? What is my purpose for doing this kind of training? If you don't ever want to get injured, then you shouldn't be doing any of this because there's always a chance of injury. And what I mean by any of this is like heavy powerlifting or heavy competitiveness of any sort. If
Mm-hmm.
you're a long distance runner, there's a chance of injury.
Oh
If you're
yeah,
a
I don't know a
cyclist-
single healthy marathon runner after a race.
Right. If you're a cyclist, if you do Spartan races, like there's always a chance of injury. So if that's not something that you really want to deal with, then, think about what your goals are. Because
Yeah.
there's a lot of other things you could be doing. But if you have the mindset and you're like, look, this could happen, I'm going to obviously not think about it, but when it comes, I'll deal with it. And, I'll figure out what I need to do then. But, we had one of our good friends talk about going through a little bit of an injury with his pec and how it can be frustrating. And you really have one of two choices. Either shut down and say, I don't want to do this right now, or use it as motivation to get better and to learn from it. And I think that's one of the biggest things. Every time I've gotten injured, I've learned something about my body and myself and how to apply it to my friends or other people that I'm helping. So it's always kind of educational.
Yeah.
Even though it's a kick in the teeth.
It's definitely a kick in the teeth. And I think the one thing that so for example, when I was injured, it was depressing. Like I couldn't do what I wanted to do. I really wanted to squat heavy. I couldn't handle it at all. And I think people are afraid to like admit that it's depressing or like demoralizing a bit. Like you put all this work in, now you got hurt and it's not going away and all that. But the reality is like, you can still put work in and get yourself stronger in other ways while you also get yourself better. And you were in there for a reason, right? Like you had goals. And like you talked about motivation, like it took a lot for me to get my butt down, into, my buddy's basement gym by myself to go lift with a hip injury, but I did it. I just sucked it up, went down there and I worked around my hip. I got stronger in other ways while I was working the pain out. And, and I'm hitting PR squats now,
Yeah.
You have to have that end goal in sight and realize that like it's not over. And it's the hardest thing in the world to do. And it's the hardest thing in the world to admit that you're feeling down about it. And it's easy to just, try to avoid it. But I think just accepting it, trying to better yourself through it, putting the work in to get better.
Yeah. Well, I think it's one of those things where like, it's very easy to tell somebody that, but if you haven't experienced it, it's really hard to understand that. You know what I mean? So like we can sit here having gone through that and be like, oh man, I'm going to end up fine, or maybe even better because we'll know that, if we get injured, we'll learn from it. And if we choose to continue on this path, we'll adjust those things. So chances are it won't happen again, or hopefully it doesn't happen again. But if you never experience it and then the first time it hits, it's hard to know that there's light at the end of the tunnel. You know what I mean? Like
for sure.
It happens and then you're like, that's it. The game's over. Life is over. What am I going to do now? It doesn't have to be that way. It just all depends like how dedicated you are to what it is that you're doing, how much you truly care about it. And that's when at the end of the day, discipline takes over,
Yeah.
because when that happens, motivation is gone.
Yeah.
Your motivation to sit on the couch and watch Netflix becomes real high.
Oh, heck
You
yeah.
know what I
I
mean?
mean, it still is.
Yeah, all the time. But that's where discipline comes into play, and it's like anything else that you've done in your lifetime. If you're at work and something happens and maybe you get like demoted, like maybe it was something that you did that got you demoted, but you're not going to just quit. I mean, you might go look for another job if it's a better opportunity, or you could say, you know what, man, I'm going to learn what I did wrong, and I'm going to be better from it, and I'm going to try to progress. And then you might end up in a higher position. Like, silly analogy, but I think you could still kind of compare it.
Yeah. I mean, even like, so like for my patients that come in, like I deal with people in pain every day, right? That's my job. The ones that get better are the ones that are disciplined enough to show up to their appointments, to put the work in, to be honest with themselves, to be honest with me, and like go through the plan of care.
Mhm.
And then, those are the people that get better. The ones that don't get better are the ones who call to cancel all the time, like chronically, for no good reason, or just stop showing up, or they're upset when the first time they come in, they're not 100% better. Like, Rome wasn't built in a day. It wasn't destroyed in a day either,
Right. I think, apparently the reason that Rome wasn't built in a day is because they ran out of Red Bull.
Oh,
Did you see that commercial?
Yeah.
Okay. Just so you know. For all the people out there, that's why it wasn't built in a day. But the people, like, I think some people don't understand that you're going to have to do very repetitive stuff over and over and over for an extended period of time in order to get better. And I think that's what some people can't handle. So like in physical therapy or with weight training or, whatever your goal is, chances are every time you go in, you're going to do something very, very similar than the previous session. When I was working in PT, it was very, very small forms of progression. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, oh, maybe you're doing a couple more reps. Maybe you're doing an extra set. Maybe you're using a little bit thicker band, whatever it may be. Like, some people can't handle that. And I think that's why some people don't get to the point where they're, they're really starting to progress and see those benefits.
I am, like, we're going to do a little scenario here. I am a client of yours.
Okay.
Or like new client or whatever, I come in and I tell you, like, before this is my first day training with you, but I was like, okay, so I just hurt myself. My back hurts a little bit when I squat, hurts when I deadlift. But I want to be good at powerlifting, for example.
Okay.
How do you go through, like what are the things that you will do with me to like help me to get my goals, but also, help me through my injury?
So what's your experience level?
Amateur, I guess.
Okay.
Novice, like trained on my own, watched some YouTube videos,
Oh, word.
Yeah.
Like 90% of
Yeah,
the population.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have you do like body weight stuff. And I might even put like a kettlebell in your hand and things like that. And we're going to do a lot of talking because I want to know when it is that you're experiencing what you're experiencing, and what positions of each movement that you're experiencing it. And then like on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad it is. And then from there, what I might do is I might pull a Jared and have some stuff that you've prescribed me or that I've heard you. I'm not a physical therapist. I'm not a doctor, but I've had people who have had these issues, including myself. And I know some things that work great for those things. So the main thing is just kind of like lightly loading them. You know what I mean? So if I hand them a kettlebell, like a 10, 15, 20 pound kettlebell, and I put a box behind them or a bench or anything, I'll start with it high. Yeah. And I'll say, okay, I want to see you do a controlled squat down to this seat, and then we'll come back up, right? And I'll talk them through it, what I want them to do with their head, their back, their hips, their feet, everything. And if they're feeling good, then we'll lower that. We'll go to a little bit lower point, right around parallel or so. And then if that's feeling good, I'll take it away, see how they're doing without that. If they're experiencing some pain, then we're going to stay with that. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Because I think and I think you might agree with this, sometimes you have to take clients and patients to that point. So A, they feel it, but B, you know where it is that you need to be working in order to make progress. And you'll kind of work them out in that area right there. Now, if it's like killing them, then no, we're going to back it off. But if it's a little bit of discomfort, we're going to work with that until the point where we get some good progression. And then of course, like on the side, that's where they're doing, some rehab exercises. If it's somewhere in their hips, there's a good chance that certain stretches, clamshell work, hip airplanes, stuff like that is really going to make a big difference to help with that movement.
Yeah.
But it's really starting from square one, and then every movement has like a form of progression to it. Deadlift, pressing, pulling, everything. And we just are gradually working up. And if we're working up and they're still experiencing that discomfort, that's okay, right? It's not getting worse, right? So we're progressing in whatever it is that they're doing, but they're not feeling more pain. So that's good. It means they're getting better.
Yeah, I would. And then you go back to the things that have previously like hurt before, and they usually don't hurt, right?
Right.
They're that much stronger, that much better. And there is like a therapeutic level of pain to a point. Like,
sure.
There are certain points where you don't want to feel anything, right? But there are certain points where like it's okay to notice it. Like you said, like you notice it, that's okay, but it's not like it's just there. It's not bothering you. You can't, you're not able to like perform or something like that.
Right. I think the first day that I really had that injury, I think I barely knew you. I sent you a message and I was like, hey, would it be possible to see you this week? And you're like, yeah. So you came in, I told you what I had going on. You checked me out a little bit, and then you had me doing a variation of the exact same thing that I was doing when I got injured.
Mm-hmm.
So I hurt myself squatting, and you had a band around my knees,
mm-hmm.
and I was doing banded tempo goblet squats.
Horrible.
Worst thing ever, but they work.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness, they work. So I had this little rubber band around my knees. I was focusing on external rotation, and I'm doing a 5-second eccentric, a 2-second to 3-second pause, and then a 5-second concentric. And like at first, you remember, I think I got through 5. You want me to do 10?
Mm-hmm.
I got through 5, and I was out of breath, and I was just sweating.
Oh, you were done. Yeah. It was great.
You were like this big wuss.
And, no, I know.
And so I guess the moral of the story is like sometimes when people get injured, they either think or they're told that they should avoid whatever it is that they were doing. When sometimes depending on different factors, doing a variation of the thing that you were doing when you got injured is going to help you, is going to benefit you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Variation is like one of the most beneficial things that you can have, right? Because so for one, your brain, for example, when you go through, you have an injury, you have pain, and you're going through a specific motion, your brain's gonna like cue like a pain response to that
mm-hmm.
specific thing, right? But so say for example, a low bar squat like really killed you, but a front-loaded goblet squat was fine,
mm-hmm.
and after that was okay, then maybe like a front squat was okay,
mm-hmm.
or a safety bar squat was okay, and then after that, maybe a high bar back squat was okay.
Mm-hmm.
And there are ways to slowly progress it. You're still squatting. The movement pattern is, relatively the
mm-hmm.
same.
Mm-hmm.
Not completely identical, but pretty darn close.
Right.
Until eventually you're able to get back to the movement, and the whole time, you're training your movement pattern, getting back, you're working on your weaknesses. Whatever deficits you might have,
mm-hmm.
but variation is key to coming back from injury, in any type of lifting or physical therapy or whatever.
Right.
Variation is awesome.
So what if I'm me, right? But not knowing and not experiencing what I have experienced. I come to you as a professional, and I'm like, dude, I've been powerlifting for like 10 years, and I got a meet coming up, in like a year from now. Let's say I just picked it out, a year ahead of time. And I was like, I had this major injury and I can't really lift. I need you to, I'm willing to take a step back and focus on the things I need to focus on. But I'm worried about my progress that I've made over the years and my strength. Is it going to go away? Like, am I just going to lose everything ever?
Nah.
how
Not
does
gonna be good.
yeah.
So the way that conversation needs to go for clinicians and for strength coaches is, one, you got to reassure the person they're not going to lose everything they've made, right? Also, with an injury, like, you can keep everything else super strong while working through pain, right? Think of all of the auxiliary lifts that right? There are, I guarantee you, most of them you're going to be able to do, right? It's just certain ones are causing your pain. So you can keep yourself super strong outside of where you're having pain. During that time, we're going to address your pain. We're going to get your pain down, and then we're going to slowly build you've been powerlifting for how long? And you haven't had an injury to this point. Maybe you overloaded yourself, whatever. Your motor pattern was probably okay, and you're a good enough lifter because you're that experienced to where, like, it's going to come back quick. So we're going to take that step back, get all your weaknesses strong, start to, get that motor pattern going again. And then by the time you get back to a barbell, I mean, it might feel rusty for a day or two, but it'll come back quick.
That quick. Yeah. And I that's crazy because that's something that I know and that you know, but unless you've experienced that and gone through it, you don't understand that that's how the body works. I was on the phone yesterday with my best friend, and he has been battling a lot of nerve issues through his neck. He's a graphic designer and does a lot of sitting. You know what I mean? Not all throughout the day. He does get up. He does exercise on his lunch break and stuff like that. But he has, I want to say his best deadlift is like 525, somewhere around there. And for the last year or so, he's been trying to figure out what it is that's been going on with his neck and his upper back. And I don't think he's been able to lift, he hasn't lifted more than I want to say 315, somewhere between 225 and 315 for almost a year. And then yesterday he sent me a video and he deadlifted 405 and it looked easier than it ever has for him. And I told him, I was like, dude, judging by that video, you could have picked up 500 pounds right there. And that's after an entire year of not really pushing it. So I think that's something to understand and know about the human body, that it's really crazy. And although something is injured and you can't do that one thing, chances are everything else that you're doing is still benefiting that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
So that goes a really long way.
Yeah, heck yeah. I think so I think people kind of want answers to specific questions when it comes to injury, because not everybody's going to go see somebody, can advocate for myself all I want, but not everybody's going to go see somebody. It's just the nature of getting hurt, being into the gym, being into lifting. You want to get yourself better and kind of find, ways to work through it. What, say someone gets hurt when they're benching, no matter what it is, and I know we've made YouTube videos about this before, but some common areas that you as a strength coach would have them address mobility wise, strength wise, where do you see some things that they should look at?
So a lot of times what I see with bench pressing is a lack of mobility. Okay. Sometimes it's form related, right? If you see somebody benching elbows straight out and we're really, really stressing those pecs, then yeah. Did you see that video, by the way?
Oh yeah, the Larry Wheels with the incline press.
Should we show that?
Oh,
No. It's all good.
I don't think people need to see that.
I will fucking quit if you make me watch that again.
All right. That was the gnarliest one I've ever seen.
That was a good one.
Anyway, a lot of times it comes from just really, really tight muscles being bound up in here, right? With our good friend, I think that maybe sitting a lot probably doesn't help his cause that much. And if he wants to continue to get stronger in the bench press, there's certain things that he's going to have to do every week throughout the week in order to lay down on that bench press and make sure he's able to complete it and continue to get stronger.
Yeah.
So a lot of times, especially for myself, I get super, super tight in here and then in the biceps tendon. And although you would be able to explain this better than I would, but although the biceps tendon doesn't directly affect the pec itself, I mean, it has, when the biceps tendon gets tight, it causes chaos in that area.
Oh yeah. So I think shoulder extension range of motion, right? So reaching your arm back is super important. And being able to reach it back without, you know, your shoulder blade coming up or coming forward, right? Like compensating with your upper trap. So you should be able to reach back at least like 40 degrees, right? Without your upper trap having to compensate. I want to say most lifters that are tend to like prone to injuries of like the biceps tendon or the pec maybe get like 10, 15 degrees,
Okay.
20, right? They don't have a lot. A lot of them also don't usually have a lot of thoracic spine mobility.
That was
right?
my next thing. Yep.
So rotation and extension, there's a lot of joints within the thoracic spine. So rotation and extension are both very helpful in improving your mobility. Long story short, if you're sitting all day and your back is rounded, okay, just go ahead and sit down around your back, right? Now, keep in that position, try to squeeze your shoulder blades together.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
And I want to go up into my neck when I do
right.
that.
So when you're on a bench and you're trying to, you know, retract and depress your scapula to really stabilize yourself, and you can't get a certain amount of thoracic extension, you're not going to be in a good position. It's going to put a lot more stress through like the anterior shoulder, for example, right?
Sure.
Also, if you don't have a lot of thoracic spine mobility and you like to try to arch, you might notice that you have back pain. That's like low back pain, super common with that. And people are like, why do I have back pain when I bench? I'm not even using it. Well, it's because you got to compensate somewhere. So you tend to arch through, you know, you think you're arching through your upper back. It's really just your lower back just popping off, and you're probably lifting your butt. So
that's not helping the calls at all.
So like thoracic spine mobility and shoulder mobility to a point are both super important. Now, I mean, you don't want to be hypermobile as a, you know, a heavy power lifter, but you do want to have like pretty normal range of motion in your shoulders, internal, external rotation, shoulder extension, to be able to safely bench. And same with your thoracic spine, extension, rotation, super important.
Now, what about being able to control your scapula? Does that go into the equation at all?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. So it is kind of funny how a lot of people really don't know how to like retract their shoulder blades or depress their shoulder blades.
I think it's really a big one.
Pretty common in lifters. Everybody's like upper traps for everything. And you're not going to get, well, Trapezosaurus Rex over here. But you're not going to get like optimal stability if you're just shrugging the whole time under a bench.
Sure.
You gotta, like, your lats have to be pretty engaged in stabilizing your shoulder blades in a little more depression.
Now, a lot of times, and this is including myself, I see people get in a nice tight position, right? Scapula depressed and maybe retracted, maybe not retracted. I don't think that's really the point of what I'm getting at, but scapula depressed, and then when they go to press the bar, they kind of elevate. Yeah.
Yep.
So is that a weakness? Is that a mobility issue? Is that something is too tight and needs to be worked out? Or, you know, what is that coming from?
So people do that. So you tend to go to what's strong, right? So for example, on like a stripper squat, you know, people squat and then their butt comes up first. They are just like avoiding their quads altogether. They just like shoot right back into their hamstrings and their glutes. They do not want anything on their quads. In a bench press, your upper traps a lot of times are like what you rely on. They're strong when you like aren't practiced in your form. So when you go to press something heavy, you're immediately going to shrug. You can probably control it at a lighter weight, but as soon as it gets a little heavy, your body goes, well, we can't support it down here. We're going to shrug this sucker up.
Right.
And that's generally where you see that. So they've trained themselves into that motor pattern now of like, I'm going to just do this every time. And so I think that's more of what's difficult for people is you got to retrain your brain to not shrug every time you are at a certain load.
Now, how do you go about working with somebody who you realize like they have no movement and control of their scapula?
You work on movement control of their scapula.
Right.
You know,
you do different drills with them and things like that.
All sorts of different like retraction, depression drills, even like working protraction and retraction, like the full range. I mean, it's all good. You just got to be able to hold that position, keep yourself stable when you're benching.
Sure. So I think when it comes to the bench press, like you said, we'll have people do some self-care, right? Self-care, whether it's in the pec, the biceps tendon. I think sometimes like tight lats might have something to do with it.
Yeah.
Self-care, but also specific drills that are going to help you control things. Rotational drills, I think, like thoracic rotational drills will help. And, you know, thoracic extension, stuff like that. So I think a big part of it is trying not to, I know it's easier said than done, but trying not to sit all day will go a really long way.
Yeah,
You know?
I like for my patients who don't have a lot of thoracic extension, I'll just give them thoracic rotation drills
Mhm.
like for sitting, and they'll teach them like how to do like thoracic extension in a chair. Just put like a little towel or something behind you and just work on it while
Yeah.
you're sitting at work. Rotation can help extension, right? You're still moving the joints, so yeah.
Okay, cool.
Um,
I think we hit a lot. Um, yeah. I mean that was pretty much Josh right there.
yeah.
He was asking, he was benching a couple nights ago. He was coming off of a deload, so
Mhm.
he was feeling pretty fresh. Now he did say that he had a little bit of stress going on, and we know that that can play a huge role
Mhm.
in how your body responds to doing different things. So
Yeah.
if you're not, getting quite enough, if you're stressed and not getting quite enough sleep, maybe that leads to a little bit being underhydrated, or maybe you didn't eat quite enough that day going into a session. There's a lot of factors that going into it. Either way, it was relatively moderate weight that he was working with. It wasn't very heavy. It was a new exercise, and he said he felt it at the lockout. So anytime I've had a pec strain, I've probably had like 3 or 4, it's always been as soon as I get off my chest, like halfway through, that I kind of feel it. And he said that he felt it almost at lockout,
Mhm.
which I thought was really strange. Um, do you think that there's something in particular that could have caused that, or maybe it was just like at the point where, hey, I feel like,
Yeah, it just might have been too much load for the tissue on that specific day. I mean, that stuff can happen.
yeah,
As long as it's like a small strain, he'll bounce back
yeah.
pretty quick.
So, Josh is a dude who loves to lift. You know what I mean? Even if he doesn't have a meet going on, he just loves to train. He loves the people that he gets to hang out with and train with. And I think that it really helps him with his peace of mind in life. And I think that's awesome. Now, for somebody like him who just experienced this, and he doesn't have a meet plan quite yet, but probably in the fall, he's been making a ton of progress too.
Mhm.
His
For
squat,
sure.
bench, deadlift, like his form and technique, like he's doing really, really well. He was on the path, and
Mhm.
then something like this happens. Mentally, how does one deal with that? You know what I mean? And we kind of touched on that earlier. But like, if you had some advice for Josh Conroy right now, Josh, if you're listening, what would you say to him?
I mean, Josh.
I
is a
would
good
tell
friend
him to
of mine.
stop hanging out with Adam. That's
That's
good
good.
advice.
Yeah, very good advice.
That is great advice. I feel like Josh is always like, I seen it, do it. Adam's always like, I seen it, do it. Put another 400 pounds on the bar. Probably not train when Adam's training.
Yeah. Sorry, that was funny.
Yeah.
No, I mean Josh is a good friend, So I think like being a good friend of his, you got to be encouraging at that point. But I think Josh knows enough now too, though. But like he can work around it,
Mhm.
right? He can get himself stronger and work around it. Continue to work on, getting his pecs stronger. Continue to work on, maybe some mobility deficits, some other like pain issues he might be dealing with too, So having pain in other certain areas could cause movement deficits too. So just being encouraging and helping him get through that stuff. And I mean, like you said, he's getting freaking strong.
Yeah.
So, and he's moving really well. So, I mean, I think, in both the other lifts, he's doing phenomenal. So
Yeah.
it's okay to take a step back on bench here and there.
Sure.
As hard as it is to stay motivated to, do it. But
I think, mentally for him, understanding and knowing why it is that he does what he does. And a lot of times it comes down because you love to be in here and you love to train. Whether you have an injury or not, this is a place that, you want to be.
yeah,
And it makes you feel good. And if you go and you were to sit it out for a few weeks, maybe it would be, beneficial, maybe not. But I know me, I would have to be in here for my well-being and for my mental stability. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So I think for him, what we're going to do going forward is figure out how to keep him in here and how to take his mind off of that, but then approach the areas that need to be approached to help strengthen and help keep that from happening again. So things like, light dumbbell press for high reps
Mm-hmm.
to A, get a lot of blood flow, B, focus on getting the fatigue in that muscle. So like when I hurt my hip, you had me doing those goblet squats to the point where I was fatigued, where I almost couldn't do
Your
a
legs
few
were
more reps.
shaking.
Right? It's not enough. Yeah, exactly. It's not enough weight to cause damage, but it puts you under that stress and makes you fight through that fatigue. I think that goes a long way. So maybe something with him is like, maybe we'll do some banded chest flies, or maybe I'll even have him do some chain flies,
Mm-hmm.
because those chains deload at the bottom. So when you're in the most vulnerable position, the load is less,
Mm-hmm.
and then at the top where you can get the greatest contraction, that's when the load really kicks in.
Yeah.
So maybe some sets of 15, sets of 20 with some chain flies, things like that, and then gradually start working the weight back up with the bar.
Yeah.
It's not really anything like crazy scientific, it's just figuring out what you can't do, figuring out what areas need work.
Yeah.
I think is the biggest thing. That's the most challenging part, is evaluating it and figuring out what area needs emphasized and how to go about doing that. Sometimes it takes a professional.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? A lot of times it takes a professional. Luckily, we have a resident professional. That's who everybody always goes
Have
to.
you ever tried like unilateral press work with dumbbells?
Yeah. Yeah, I do a lot.
Like, so if like you have a chronic, like your pec is constantly like bugging you on the right side or something, just seeing, unilateral press work.
I think something I really like doing is an isolateral dumbbell press. Now, so I'll make that injury side stabilize that isometric contraction while I'm performing repetitions on the opposite side. That always seems to work. And something simple that does is it prevents you from going too heavy. You know what I mean? So you can get a lot of work in without overloading the muscle group too much.
Yeah.
And that's another good thing about variation too, is there's ways that you can load that muscle without overloading it and making it worse.
Yeah.
So
yeah, for sure.
that's a good thing as well. But Josh will be back. Josh is a good dude. And, you hate it when anybody gets injured, but sometimes it's inevitable. If you do something long enough and you're pushing it, hard enough, so like running, can you imagine like how many steps a runner takes over the course of their running career? I mean, you can't even think of how much shock that is, like on the knees or whatever. With powerlifting, like how many reps you do over the course of 5, 10, 15 years, like something's probably going to happen. And I think just approaching it with an open mindset and just like taking on whatever gets thrown at you is the best thing to do.
You know what your goals are. If you're motivated, you'll get through it and get better.
Yeah, 100%.
Yep.
So if you have a crazy injury besides the one of Larry Wheel's training partner,
yeah,
that was bonkers, man. I've seen some pretty nasty injuries, and that was one of the worst.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah, but I did hear that guy is doing well, had his surgery.
Yeah, just got it reattached.
Yeah.
Get through rehab, he'll be right back.
He's probably back to benching. So.
Oh, I'm sure.
All right, guys. Take care. Thanks for joining in, and we'll see you on the flip side.
Later, skaters.